If you look at cancers in general, treatments have gotten better over the years in almost every category, and we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for clinical trials.
That's Dr. Tondre Buck from the Gibbs Cancer Center and Research Institute. On today's Cancer Buzz, a special roundtable conversation with a patient and her care team about trust and her choice to participate in a clinical trial. Welcome back to the award-winning Cancer Buzz, the show for the oncology professional that discusses the latest in cancer care. I'm your host, Summer Johnson. Clinical trials are critical to the development of life-saving treatments, and it's important that these trials reflect the diversity of the populations they serve. This means actively including patients from historically underrepresented groups. We know we have to place an emphasis on building trust with those patients and making sure we engage in shared decision-making right from that first conversation. In the first of ACCC's Patient Journey series, we explore one patient's experience with clinical trials and the lessons care teams can take from these open conversations. Today, I'm joined by Glyniss Redman and her care team from the Gibbs Cancer Center and Research Institute in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Oncologist, hematologist Dr. Tondre Buck, and clinical research coordinator Audrianna Carrington. Glyniss received treatment there for multiple myeloma. Thank you all for being here. Glyniss, let's start with you. Why don't you give us an overview of your cancer story and maybe the timeline and being introduced to your cancer care team?
Sure. I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, stage 3 multiple myeloma, almost 6 years to this month. Uh, I was with a different care team and I was having some symptoms, and I had a doctor who said, well, when you get off the road, because I'm a touring poet, she said, let's do some blood tests because I was having some pain and some different issues, and went in, and lo and behold, blood test came back where she thought I had kidney disease, which I thought real odd. She said, well, let's just keep testing. And within 3 weeks, it was diagnosed as multiple myeloma. And so I went in, really quickly started getting set up for having a stem cell transplant. It took us about 6 months to get to the point of having a stem cell transplant. This was 2019. And then went in for a stem cell transplant, was in the hospital for 21 days. That took me right into the pandemic. The COVID came in, and right when I was having my stem cell transplant. So since then, I did achieve remission. So I've been on this journey and transferred my care to Dr. Buck. I'm not really sure. I'm not good with timelines, and Dr. Buck might know, or Adriana might know when I came in. I don't know if it was 2 years ago or two
Yeah,
and a
it
half
sounds about
years.
right.
Probably roughly.
Okay,
hmm
because I'm horrible with dates. But transferred my care over there, and I've been on a watch and wait. I'm not in active treatment at this time, but I went through that course of that first line of treatment and got to a manageable state with my health and with my cancer. And so, like I said, this is my 6th year.
That's fantastic news. I'm glad that we're able to talk to you about it today. Dr. Buck and Audrianna, what did that introduction look like when you met Glyniss? She had already been through her first line of treatment, and then she presents to you.
Sure. I'll start with it. So Glennis' team had done such a great job that I didn't have to do much when I started seeing her. So we decided just to keep her on observation, which if you look at the percentage of multiple myeloma patients who are on observation at this point, is pretty low because the standard of care now is some kind of maintenance or low dose therapy. Glennis had some side effects from some of her maintenance drugs. And since she was in remission, we decided to hold off on restarting any kind of treatment. And that sort of leads us into the reason we wanted to put her on this. Adriana will talk about the moonshot study a little bit because myeloma patients behave so differently. The more information that we can get on folks like Glynis and will help us hopefully treat this better, as we continue to move on here.
So how I met Glenn is, Dr. Buck always refers to a big study we have here at the Gibbs Cancer Center called the Cancer Moonshot Biobank, which looks at patients from different walks of life with different cancer types who are willing to donate their cancer tissue and blood to research. And we have a local project here that focuses on multiple myeloma amongst African American patients. So as Glyniss was being transferring her care here to Gibbs, Dr. Buck called me and was like, listen, I think we have a great patient who would benefit from joining the trial. She's, transferring her care. We're going to do an initial workup. I think she's fine, but we're going to go through the entire process. So that's how I was able to meet Glyniss. And, Dr. Buck introduced the study to her. And then I came in as the clinical research professional. We sat down, we talked. I explained the rationale of the study. She agreed to participate. And that's kind of how our relationship started forming.
Let's back up and talk about how we have those conversations with patients. What are some of the most common patient misconceptions that you receive, Dr. Buck, when you introduce the thought of a trial?
Sure. It's I don't want to be a guinea pig is a common,
Mm-hmm.
statement that I hear. And particularly growing up in the South, I trained in Mississippi, so there are some, shall I say, barriers,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's a couple of things. So number one, the primary care or the care team needs to believe in the clinical trial.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, we always start off by saying that there are two, broad types of clinical trials. There are interventional clinical trials where we're trying to do a treatment and find out. Then there's observational or data collecting or sample collecting clinical trials. Number three, in this country, one of the big misconceptions is a patient may say in common terms is, I don't want the sugar pill. I don't want the placebo.
Mm-hmm.
So in this country, there is no placebo. In general, clinical trials that are interventional clinical trials, there's a standard of care plus minus something. So you kind of start off with a broad conversation. Then we sort of wrap it up by saying that if you look at cancers in general, treatments have gotten better over the years in almost every category, and we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for clinical trials. So that's kind of a broad conversation that we have.
What are some of the things that you hear, Audrianna, when you're speaking with patients?
Well, to piggyback off Dr. Buck, one of the big ones, focuses on the guinea pig, but I've also ran into patients who brings up the Tuskegee syphilis study, also the Henrietta Lacks situation. And so I always encourage patients in this manner. If you have a clinical research professional and a physician who is uncomfortable answering your questions regarding the historical issues surrounding research, it's okay for you to get a second opinion and talk to someone about that, because as people who are trained in the field of medicine, in the field of research, we are supposed to be comfortable to talk about those things. We do have to talk about past unethical, you know, experimentation and research in order for us to better prepare of how we're going to go forward and explain things about the IRB and explain things why we have these committees. Dr. Buck and myself sit on a community advisory board here at the Gibbs Cancer Center. And with that, we have patients and family members and survivors, along with hospital leadership, who get together quarterly to figure out how can we better put trials out in the community. What are the questions that need to be answered? So for me, I usually run into those. Well, how is this going to be different than Tuskegee? How is this going to be different than the Henrietta Lacks situation? And I'm comfortable to talk about that. And I think that's something that I always tell other clinical research professionals. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, but it will get better. So
You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's well said. So, Glyniss, Dr. Buck, and Audrianna come and speak to you about a clinical trial. Did you have any specific concerns, and how did you receive that information?
Well, first of all, I would say I never thought I would be in the situation of having cancer, period. So that came, as a shock, even though I had some chronic illnesses. Um, the reservations that they are talking about, especially in the Black community, are, I mean, pretty widespread. Um, Everyone's going to have that conversation or that talk or that memory, I would say collective memory that we have. But as a a literary citizen and someone who's used to doing outreach. When it was time for when I got diagnosed with cancer, I said, I'm a public person. I've been doing outreach for 30 years, and I want to do that in my life as well, as far as being diagnosed with cancer. So I didn't have those reservations. I read a lot on the Henrietta Lacks story. I read all those things, and I've had people who've had some tremendous barriers in medical care. My father, who was a veteran, so what I tried to do is be informed as much as possible, find a care team that I feel respects me and I respect them. So I did not have those reservations. I felt it was my place to step up personally, but also professionally. And so that was part of my walk and how I moved into the area of clinical trials. And I find myself as being a medical advocate, of sorts, and trying to do this work and talk to people in the community and say, it's okay. We need these numbers. We need this to move forward. We need this to progress. And sure, there's been some heinous things in the past, but things are different.
So you didn't have any reservations. Did you make a decision in that initial conversation that they had with you?
I made that conversation even before I got to them because I had been in clinical trials or asked to be in clinical trials. So early on, I mean, from day one, I it was a personal uh, moment that I had with myself that I said, this is something that I feel called to do. So when um, Adriana was asking me, I said, yeah, this sounds like, especially when it's so focused on the African American community. And plus, knowing the numbers that African Americans are 50% more likely to get multiple myeloma. As this is something, we all know sickle cell, right? And we know how that impacts the Black community. A lot of people don't know about multiple myeloma. I didn't know. It was the first time I heard of multiple myeloma was when I was diagnosed with it. And so, for someone who knows, I feel like I study, I know, why in the world didn't I know? And so I just want to also just raise awareness. So that was part of my walk.
We'll be back right after this break. If you were a patient living with cancer, wouldn't you want to hear about oncology clinical trials? As a patient, you should know all of your options, including which clinical trials are available to you. Phase 3 oncology clinical trials provide additional support and monitoring and access to cutting-edge research that may improve outcomes and advance science. Did you know only 7% of U.S. cancer patients participate in clinical trials? Increasing enrollment can shorten trial enrollment timelines and may help researchers find potential cancer treatments faster. Lilly is dedicated to broadening access to clinical trials and helping to streamline the enrollment process so that all oncology healthcare professionals in the U.S. can consider clinical trials for all of their appropriate patients. Try out the easy-to-use Trial Finder to help you find clinical trials for your patients who may be eligible, whether it's sponsored by Lilly or not, in just a few clicks. In your commitment to provide the most innovative care possible to your patients, make sure to always consider clinical trials and talk to your patients about them when it's appropriate. To learn more and access the Trial Finder, visit talkabouttrials.com. I want to go back to what you all have touched on, and that is the trust within the African American community. How do we build that trust, Dr. Buck, when we're talking to a patient about clinical trials?
Yeah, sure. That is a complicated answer to a complicated situation. And to be honest, you would think me being black would help with that, but it doesn't. I've had my own share of growing pains, doing this. So I think number one, you have to have a compassionate care team, physician lead who really believes that this data is important. Uh, to me, that's the first biggest step. And it's, besides that, is having an open and honest conversation and try to explain that, you know, things are different now, we hope, and from a healthcare perspective, I think time is important. So give me an example, Summer. If I got 35 patients, in a day, oftentimes uh, docs don't feel like they have time to sit here and talk about it, but you got to spend, and it doesn't take long. I mean, Glyniss was easy. It took us 5 minutes and she was already ready to roll. But you got to take a little bit of time if you're passionate about it, and then just have an open and honest conversation. And that starts with the patients having that background trust, in the team. So long answer, but it's a complicated situation, one patient at a time. That's my
Mhm.
approach.
I would even piggyback off of Dr. Buck. We have had patients who not only have we provided education, because education is key in this as well, in this complex situation. We've had to educate the patient, but as well as family. I remember we've had a patient maybe about 2 years ago, a little bit before we met Glennis, and it was a mother, matriarch of the family with leukemia, and I met the matriarch of the family. I met her son, the daughter-in-law, the granddaughter. I mean, they all showed up. So we had to set up a situation in a separate room. And informed consent is an ongoing process for a clinical trial. So everyone was a part of the informed consent process that day, while Dr. Buck had a full clinic schedule. So, Glennis was a case where she already knew the background and education of clinical trials. She was ready to go. She had done her research on our cancer center. She did her research on Dr. Buck. I mean, she was forward. Whereas we meet somebody who's new but also brings family, that process took much longer because, like I say, education is key in this. So not only did he have to step in, I had to be involved and advocate as well, not only for that patient, but as well as the family, because ultimately that is who is the caregiver in the situation.
That's a good point. So I can imagine that shared decision making when you're speaking with patients and their families might take more than one touch point, right? So it takes more time, to Dr. Buck's point.
Absolutely.
And these are conversations that I've had with my family and my daughter before we even got to, the hospital and
Hmm.
care. So it's just, I think it's a matter of awareness and knowing what you're getting into. I'm not saying that there are not systemic issues dealing with the health system as an African American. I've had so many barriers to my health care. And one of the reasons why I am with Dr. Buck. So that made that through line real easier for me.
Let's go back then to those barriers that you touched on. What are some of the barriers that patients face, particularly in the South and particularly in the African American community, enrolling in clinical trials? Talk us through that.
To me, two biggest ones. Once again, trust, and we'll go from the patient side, right? So, patient side, I think, is trust in the care team. Misconceptions about clinical trials are probably the two uh, biggest things that I can think of. Once again, based off historical mistrust in healthcare in general, right? And so, those are probably the two biggest things from a healthcare side. Things that we already touched on, number one, are you passionate about putting um, less represented patients on clinical trials? Do you believe in the clinical trials that you're doing? Are you always actively seeking, trying to treat patients better? And so those are the ones who have high numbers of enrolling these folks. And then last, you need to be in an area, and we're fortunate to be in the area where we have this patient population. So to me, the way I've viewed this throughout my short career, that this is sort of like a gold mine. That's the way I think about it. We need this data. We may not have it while we are here on Earth, but we may have it, later on down the road.
Absolutely. Location is a barrier. Here at the Gibbs Cancer Center, we do have 4 locations for our cancer center and to touch our rural population. And for this study, the Moonshot study, is focused on not just diversity, representation, and trial by race and ethnicity, but also location. So my first year working here, I spent a lot of time at one of our rural clinics with Dr. Buck in Union, and the barrier is transportation. So like if a patient needs a bone marrow biopsy, they have to travel 40 minutes to the main hospital site to have that, because that procedure to diagnose their blood cancer is not available in their area. Dr. Buck is available once a week to follow up with them, to see them, to do the workup, but for the actual procedure, they're having to travel to the hospital. So what we do in our research department is, the research coordinators, research nurses, professionals, we travel. along with the medical oncologist to these sites to enroll these patients, eligible patients, on the trial. So seeing who, we get the referrals, and also I let the patients know, just as I let Glynis know, your work, you don't have to come find me, I come find you. That's how this works. Because that is one barrier that we are tackling. We don't want to put that stress on the patients who have to choose between gas, their physician visit, their food, or their medicine for the day. So that is a huge barrier. And you really want that population to be represented on the trial because rural populations tend to have higher cancer rates.
Glynis, Audrianna says she's going to come find you.
She did.
That's right.
Did.
How else has Audrianna and Dr. Buck and the rest of your care team supported you during your clinical trial journey?
Well, I think the biggest part, just to back up just a little bit, as far as barriers and access, I think that for me on the patient side, just being seen is goes a long way as a person. And I face some barriers of not being seen, and I find that hard because I make it pretty easy to be seen. Like I want you to know I'm a human. I have jokes. I'm a person. And so when I feel, and when I don't feel that trust, I will go elsewhere. So both of them saw me very early on. I felt a warm embrace, and that was really important as far as the trust to even go further with clinical trials, and that says a lot as far as just and also cultural sensitivity. There's this aspect that's really important to me, especially being a Black woman in the South, of not being talked down to, being looked into the eye. I'm gonna come in with a lot of questions and not feel like those questions are dismissed. And I felt like both of them answer my questions, and they know I'm a talker, and I'm not going to try to monopolize a whole lot of time, but I have a lot of questions, and so I felt like those questions were met by both of them.
What would you say to another patient who is considering a clinical trial but might be on the fence a little bit?
I would tell them to do your research, okay? Because it's about you. Number one, do your research before you say yes. um, But one of the things that Dr. Buck was saying that kind of struck me, we're playing the long game here. Um, some of the information or this research may not be about me. It is about our future generations. I've got grandkids. I've got three. And the possibility of them having multiple myeloma or another cancer is high. So this is a legacy game for me. I'm 62, I'm 61, but will be at 62 this next month. But it's important. What do you want to do with your life? Mary Oliver's a poet. What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? Well, this is what I'm doing with my wild and precious life. I want to be here as long as I possibly can, but I also want my offspring, my children, my grandchildren, and my great grandchildren to be here as well and have a better experience as far as healthcare and cancer or any other medical needs that they might have. So that's my belief system.
I'll open this to everyone. How do we make clinical trials more accessible and more inclusive?
Yeah, I keep saying the same thing, over and over again. But I think it's once again, you have to have that passionate care team who really believe in clinical trials. Then you have to, from a physician or from a care team standpoint, take the time. Take the time. Any patient that comes, even with new diagnosis, one of the things I always say is, or one of the things I'm always thinking about is there a clinical trial that may give this patient a better option than the standard of care, whether they get it from me, whether they get it from other places. So if you see me as a new cancer diagnosis, I always say, hey, if you got this cancer, Duke or Levine or one of these places has an awesome clinical trial if you have the resources to go there. Now, most people want to stay close to home, but I think you can't have an ego in this, thing, because in the end, it's all about treating patients the best as possible.
Audriana?
I can agree with having staff who is on board to do the work to get the information out. You do have to care, but you also have to put the work behind caring. And it is a lot of work. Clinical research is it's a lot of work. Building your stakeholders is another key thing I will say. Finding people who not only believe in the needs for clinical trials for patients, but also wanting to invest in getting the information out there. So outside of just the research department, outside of your medical oncology team, sometimes you have to pull in the higher up leadership and say, hey, we have this, this is what we have going on. Myself and Dr. Buck has been involved in this many, 5 years now. This is what we have going on. This project is really important. We have a need in our community. What can you do from the top as stakeholders to get this information out there? So your stakeholders play a huge role as well. And that piece is usually left out a lot. But I would definitely push that for the support.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we have a lot of action points to walk away with, particularly for oncology professionals. Glyniss, we're going to end with you, and you got to give us something poetic.
Well, I don't know if my response is poetic, but I will say this. As a person, a lay person, is that telling your story is one of the most powerful things that you can possibly do. And that's what I'm doing. I'm choosing to tell my story, and hopefully, with my platform, other folks in our community can see that they can walk this way as well. And I try to be as truthful and honest as possible. And one of my big things is the motto that I came up with through this all, and I'm still facing some health challenges, but my motto is to bloom anyhow. And no matter the struggle, and we know the outcome is not always great, but what can we do in this moment to unfurl, to flower, and to be our true selves? And so it can be dire. It's hard at times. There are times where I didn't want to get up. There are times, even today, where I struggle, and Dr. Buck knows that I've struggled with some mood stuff throughout this journey. But I have found reasons to put one step before the other. And their grandkids, my garden, and my poetry, and this walk and figuring out how to be present in this lifetime. And I want to hopefully impact others to do the same.
Thank you to our guest today. You can find resources on increasing diversity in clinical trials, plus more on the Just Ask program. Just head to the show notes. ACCC is celebrating 6 years of award-winning content made expressly for the oncology care community. We have much more new content and fresh shows planned in the upcoming weeks. We hope you take a minute to follow the show to make sure you never miss an episode. Just tap the plus sign in your podcast player. Until next time, for the Cancer Buzz team, this is Summer Johnson.
This show is a resource of the Association of Community Cancer Centers.